I was 11 years old the night my mother knocked on a stranger's door and asked him to take in 4 people he had never met. I remember the cold more than anything, not the kind of cold you feel in your hands, the kind you feel in your stomach, the kind that tells you something has gone wrong and there is no fixing it. We had walked most of 2 days by then. My boots had a hole in the left heel. My sister Ruth was 7, and she stopped crying somewhere on the second morning, which scared me more than the crying had. And Toby, my little brother, he was 4. My mother carried him the whole way. She never set him down, even when her arms shook. You should understand something about my mother. Her name was Marin. People who knew her before said she used to laugh easy. I don't remember that woman much. The woman I remember had a straight back and a tight mouth and eyes that always seemed to be counting something: coins, miles, days of food left. My father had been dead about 5 months by then. A logging accident. A tree that fell the wrong way. He was there in the morning and gone by supper, and after that, everything we had slowly went away too. The land wasn't ours, it turned out. The debts were, and a widow with 3 small children in that part of the country in those years, well, there weren't a lot of doors that opened for her. So she chose the highest, loneliest one she could find. There was a man who lived up past the tree line on the shoulder of the mountain we could see from town. Everybody knew of him and almost nobody knew him. The way folks talked, you'd think he was half a ghost story. They called him the man on Crane's Hollow, or just Crane, because his name was Silas Crane and he'd lived up there alone for as long as the old-timers could remember. Hunter. Trapper. A man who came down to the valley maybe twice a year, traded furs for salt and powder and coffee, said about 9 words the whole time and went back up before dark. He didn't go to church. He didn't go to the saloon. He didn't court anybody's daughter. Some said he'd lost a wife and child years back, somewhere east, and come west to be done with people. Some said he'd killed a man. Some said he just didn't like the smell of us. Children dared each other to walk up his path and turn around at the broken fence. None of them ever went past it. My mother walked us straight up to his door. I asked her why. I remember asking with my teeth going, why him? And she looked down the mountain at the town we'd left, all those warm windows, all those people who had given her a meal and a sad look and a closed door, and she said, because a lonely man might have room he isn't using. That's all she said. I didn't understand it then. I think I do now. It was near dark when we reached the cabin. Snow had started, not the soft kind, the hard kind, little stinging pieces. The cabin was bigger than I expected, low and long, with a stone chimney and a stack of split wood under the eave that was taller than I was and went on for half the wall. There was a barn behind it, and a dog started barking before we even got close, a deep barking that made Ruth grab my coat. Smoke came from the chimney. A lamp burned in one window. It looked, I thought, like the warmest place in the whole world and the most dangerous. My mother set Toby down for the first time in I don't know how long. She straightened her shawl. She fixed Ruth's collar with 2 fingers, though it was too cold to matter. Then she knocked. The dog went quiet. There was a long stretch of nothing. Then the door opened and there he was. I had built him up in my head the way children do. A monster, a giant, a wild man with a beard down to his belt. He wasn't exactly. He was big, yes, tall and broad, with shoulders that filled the doorway, and he did have a beard, gray going to white at the edges, and hair tied back rough. But the thing I noticed first was his eyes. They weren't mean. I'd expected mean. They were tired. They were the eyes of someone who had decided a long time ago to want nothing, and the wanting nothing had worn deep grooves into his face. He looked at my mother. He looked at me, at Ruth, at Toby holding my mother's skirt with both fists. He didn't say hello. He didn't say anything. He just looked, and the snow came down between us, and I could feel my mother gathering herself. My name is Marin Holloway, she said. These are my children, Caleb, Ruth, and Tobias. My husband is dead. We have no place to sleep tonight and the snow is coming hard. I am not asking you to keep us. I am asking you for one night. We will leave at first light. I have thought about that little speech my whole life, the dignity in it. She did not beg. She stated facts, the way you'd report the weather. I think she decided that if she was going to be turned away again, she would at least be turned away standing up straight. Silas Crane didn't answer for a long moment. He looked past her at the sky the way mountain men do reading it. Then his eyes came back down to Toby. Just Toby. The littlest one, with his nose running and his eyes huge in the lamplight. "He'll lose those fingers if you keep him out here," Crane said. His voice was low and rusted, like a hinge that hadn't moved in years. "Come in." That was all, "come in," 2 words, but I have heard 1,000 kinder speeches in my life that meant less. The inside of that cabin is burned into me. The heat hit us first, a wall of it, and Ruth made a sound I'll never forget, a kind of gasp like her whole body had forgotten what warm felt like. There was a big stone hearth with a fire going, and a kettle, and the smell of wood smoke and pelts and something cooking. Skins on the walls, a long table, a rifle over the door. The dog, an old gray thing with one torn ear, came up and sniffed at Toby, and then, to everyone's surprise, lay down right at his feet like that was settled. Crane didn't make a fuss over us. That's important to understand about him. He didn't coo or comfort. He moved around us like we were weather that had come inside. He pulled the bench up to the fire. He took the lid off a pot and looked in it and said, mostly to himself, "Not enough." Then he went out into the snow without a coat and came back a few minutes later with more, and he put it on, and he stretched a meal for 1 man into a meal for 5 without ever once saying he was doing it. We ate, God, we ate, rabbit and some kind of root and bread that was hard but good. Ruth fell asleep with the spoon still in her hand. Toby ate until my mother told him to stop, and then Crane, without looking up, said, "Let him eat," and she did. I caught her crying once quietly into her sleeve when she thought none of us could see. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind that comes out when you finally get to set a heavy thing down. That night he gave us his bed, a real bed, with a tick mattress, and he slept by the fire on a roll of skins with the rifle near his hand. Ruth and Toby were out cold in minutes. My mother lay between them, awake, I think, most of the night. And I lay there pretending to sleep, watching the firelight move on the ceiling, listening to the wind try to get into that strong little house and fail. I heard my mother whisper once across the room, "Thank you." And after a while, from over by the fire, that rusted voice came back. "Storm'll likely hold 3 days, maybe 4. A pause. No sense going down in it. It wasn't 'you can stay.' It was a mountain man's way of saying it, telling you the weather and letting you draw your own conclusions. The storm held 5 days. We did not leave at first light. We did not leave for a long time, and the way it happened was so slow and so quiet that I cannot point to the day we stopped being guests and started being something else. There was never a conversation about it. With Silas Crane, there were almost never conversations about anything. There were just things that got done, and after they got done, you understood what they meant. The first morning, the snow was up past the windows on one side. Crane was already gone when I woke, out checking his lines, and my mother was up too, and she had done a thing that I think decided everything. She had cleaned, not in a fussy way. She had simply, without being asked, set that cabin to rights, swept the floor, scrubbed the table, mended a tear in a blanket she'd found, set the pot to soaking. When Crane came back in, stamping snow, he stopped in the doorway and looked at the room. Looked at the swept floor, said nothing, but something moved in his face. I think it had been a very long time since anyone had cared for that house. I think he had forgotten that a house could be cared for. The days went like that. My mother worked. She was not a woman who could sit in another person's home and be fed for free. It wasn't in her. She cooked, she cleaned, she patched his clothes, she rendered fat and made soap that actually lathered. Ruth, once she warmed up, turned out to be the kind of child who follows you everywhere asking questions, and she followed Crane. He'd grunt at first, then he started answering. I'd see them out by the woodpile, this huge silent man and this tiny girl, and he'd be showing her how to tell which logs would split clean, and she'd be talking the whole time and he'd be listening. Toby just loved him outright, the way little ones do, with no caution at all. He'd toddle after the old dog, and the dog would lead him right back to Crane's feet every time. And me, I watched. I was the oldest. I was the one who remembered our father best, who'd taken the death hardest, who decided somewhere in those 2 days of walking that I was the man of the family now, and that meant I shouldn't trust anyone, least of all this stranger. I held myself apart from him on purpose. I think part of me was angry that we needed him at all. Crane never pushed. That's the thing I came to understand. He never tried to win me. He just left doors open and let me decide whether to walk through. The first one he left open was an axe. About a week in, the storm finally broke and the work of the place doubled. Crane needed wood split, and a lot of it, and one morning he laid a second axe on the chopping block next to his own and didn't say a word about it, just started working. I stood at the edge of the yard with my arms crossed, freezing, too proud to come over. He split wood for maybe an hour. He never once looked at me. And finally the cold and the boredom and something else, something I couldn't name, walked me over there, and I picked up that axe, and I swung it, and I missed the log entirely and nearly took off my own foot. I waited for him to laugh. He didn't. He set down his own axe, came over, and without a word moved my hands on the handle here and squared my feet and tapped the back of my knee so it bent and stepped back. "Let the axe do it," he said. "You're trying to chop. Just lift it and get out of its way." I swung again. The log fell open clean in two. I will not tell you what that did to me, a fatherless boy of 11, to split that log clean while a man like that stood and watched. I will only tell you that I worked beside him every day after that, and somewhere in all that splitting, the anger I was carrying split open too and fell away in halves, and I let it. I learned who he was in pieces over that winter, never all at once. My mother learned the most. They'd sit by the fire after we children were down, and at first they barely spoke, and then they spoke more. I'd hear the low murmur of it through the wall. One night I heard the whole story, or enough of it. He had had a family, a wife, Sarah, a son. They'd died of fever the same week back in Ohio when the boy was 6. Crane had been away when it happened, gone to sell at market, and he came home to 2 fresh graves and a neighbor who'd buried them because no one knew when he'd return. He said he hadn't been able to stay in a place where every road and tree and table reminded him. So he went west and kept going west and kept going up, until he found a mountain high enough that nothing up there had ever known his wife or his son, and he stopped, and he stayed, and he made sure to need no one ever again, because needing people was how you got 2 graves and an empty house. "And then you knocked," I heard him say to my mother. There was a long quiet. I'd gotten good at the not needing, 30 years of practice. Another quiet. "You undid it in about a day." I don't know what my mother said back. She said it too soft. But I know that after that night, things were different between them, gentler, the way the air goes soft before spring even though the snow's still on the ground. We had been there about 2 months when the men from town came up the mountain. It was March, the worst part of winter, when the food runs low and tempers run high. 3 men. I knew one of them, Harlan Pike, who'd held some of my father's debt and had come once before to take what he was owed, which was everything. He'd been the loudest of the doors that closed on us. And now here he was, up Crane's path with 2 others and a paper in his hand, and the look of a man who'd had a few drinks for courage on the climb. What it came down to was this. There was a notion in town, Pike had spread it, that the widow Holloway had run off to live in sin with the mountain man, and that her children were being raised wild and godless up there, and that it was a decent town's Christian duty to do something about it. But under the church talk was the real thing, which was money. My father's debts hadn't died with him. They'd landed on my mother. And Pike had figured out that if the children were made wards of the town, sent off to relations back east or to a county home, then there'd be no widow to feel sorry for, and the small piece of land my father had been buying, the piece that turned out to be worth something after all, because of timber, would clear up nice and easy and end up where Pike wanted it. He didn't say all that. He said it in church words. He stood in that yard and read from his paper and said the children would be taken into proper care, and he had men in town who'd back him, and a magistrate who'd sign it, and there was nothing an unwed woman living up a mountain could do about it. My mother went white. I remember that. The blood just left her face, because she knew it could be true. The law in those days did not love a widow. She had no money, no man, no standing. She had a swept floor and 3 fed children and a heart that had only just started beating right again, and none of that was worth anything on Harlan Pike's paper. And Silas Crane, who had not said one word the whole time, stepped forward off the porch. I want to tell you he had his rifle. He didn't. That's what I'd have expected then from a mountain man cornered, the gun, the threat, the violence. And maybe 20 years before, the man he used to be would have done it that way. But this Crane, this one, he came down off the porch with his hands empty and open at his sides, and he stopped in front of Harlan Pike, close, and he looked down at him from his whole great height, and for a moment nobody breathed. Then he spoke, and his voice was so quiet that Pike's men had to lean in to hear it, and that quiet was somehow more frightening than any shout would have been. "You're right about one thing," Crane said. "She's living up here, and these children are being raised up here." He let that sit. "You came up to tell me that's a shame, so let me tell you what's been happening on this mountain, and then you can decide whose shame it is." He didn't raise his voice once. He told them. He told them the boy could split a cord of wood now and tend a trapline. He told them the girl knew her letters because the mother taught her by firelight every single night. He told them the littlest one had come up that mountain with frostbite starting in his fingers, and how he had 10 fingers now. He told them the widow Holloway had walked 2 days through the cold rather than send her children to a county home, and that any man who called that running off to sin had never been cold a day in his life or loved anything in it. He told them all of this in the flat, plain, weatherman's voice of a man who deals only in facts, and the facts were heavier than any sermon. Then he reached into his coat, slow, so they wouldn't startle, and he pulled out a worn leather pouch, the kind trappers keep their season's earnings in, and he held it out toward Pike. "Whatever Holloway owed," Crane said, "I'll clear it today in full, you name it." He shook the pouch once so the coin in it spoke for itself, and it was heavy, heavier than anyone up there would have guessed. 30 years of furs and no one to spend it on. "And then this paper of yours has nothing left to stand on. No debt, no charity case, nothing for your magistrate to sign." He took one more step, and now he was very close to Pike, and his voice dropped lower still. "And if you ever come up my mountain again to frighten this woman or these children, I will stop being the man who paid you. Do you understand me, Harlan? I have buried people I loved before. I have nothing left to be afraid of. That makes me the most dangerous kind of man you will ever stand in front of. So take the money, clear the debt, and don't come back." I have replayed that moment 10,000 times. The snow was still on the ground, but it had that wet smell that means it's leaving. Pike's 2 men had already started edging back toward the path. And Pike looked at that pouch, and looked at Crane's face, and looked at my mother standing in the doorway with her hand on Ruth's shoulder, and whatever was in him that had carried him up the mountain ran clean out. He took the pouch. He counted it with shaking fingers, right there, and it was more than enough, and he knew it. He folded his paper up small and put it away. And he said, in a small, mean voice that was the last gasp of his pride, "It ain't decent, the 4 of you up here." And Silas Crane said the thing that ended it. He said it without heat, the way you'd correct a child about a simple fact he'd gotten wrong. "It's the most decent thing that's ever happened to me," he said. "Now get off my land." They went. We watched them all the way down until the trees took them, and nobody moved or spoke until they were gone. And then Toby, who was too little to understand any of it, said he was hungry, and the whole terrible spell of the thing broke, and my mother laughed, this wild, relieved laugh with tears in it, and that was that. It wasn't quite that, of course. Real life is never one clean moment. There was talk in town for a while. There was a hard spring. But Crane married my mother that summer in the valley with the same preacher who'd been part of Pike's church talk presiding, looking sheepish about it. I stood up beside Crane as his, well, there isn't a clean word for what I was to him. The law would have said stepson. I never used that word, and neither did he. He just called me his boy, and I called him by his name for years, Silas, until one day when I was about 15 and he was teaching me to set a beam for the room we were adding onto the cabin. I called him something else without planning to, and he stopped working. And he didn't look at me, and he just said, "Hold that level," in a voice that wasn't quite steady, and I held it, and neither of us ever mentioned it, and I called him that for the rest of his life. He lived a long time, long enough to walk Ruth down to the same valley church and give her away, long enough to teach Toby everything he knew about the mountain, and Toby stayed on it, has it still, long enough to grow truly old by the fire with my mother, the two of them not talking much, because they never did need to talk much, just being in the same room, which for both of them was a kind of miracle they never stopped being quietly amazed by. I asked him once, near the end, why he'd let us in that first night. I'd always wondered. He could have closed the door. He'd closed it on the whole world for 30 years. One more closed door would have cost him nothing. He thought about it a long time, the way he thought about everything. Then he said, "Your brother's face." He meant Toby in the doorway with the frost starting in his fingers. I'd spent 30 years up here so I'd never have to watch another child I couldn't save. He was quiet. And there one was on my own porch, and I could. He shrugged his big old shoulders. Turned out I'd had room the whole time. I just convinced myself I didn't. Because empty rooms don't hurt you when somebody dies. I think about that more than almost anything anyone has ever said to me. We came up that mountain as 4 people with nothing, looking for one night out of the snow. We found a man who had buried his whole family and built a wall of cold around himself so high that the entire town below had given up on ever reaching him. My mother walked up and knocked on it anyway. And the strange, true thing, the thing I've spent my whole life trying to understand, is that we didn't save him by being saved. He saved us plainly with food and warmth and a clean leather pouch full of 30 lonely years. But what he got back, what we gave him without ever meaning to, was the one thing he'd climbed a mountain to stop wanting. He'd come up there to be done with people. And 4 cold strangers knocked on his door, and instead of a place to stay, he found a family, and the lonely mountain man was never lonely again.